Welcome to this week's episode of the Aiming Five Hole podcast with Phil and Ryan. How you doing, Ryan? Should we start this podcast by singing "O Canada"?
If I wouldn't end the loyalty
No
of our
listeners wants to
15
hear. No listener wants to hear me
listeners
sing.
right off the bat, maybe I would. But
But as you
yeah,
can see, I'm still wearing all my Canada paraphernalia. I'm having fun with my American friends that were all rooting against Canada, rooting for their Americans. But as I said in
well,
my post on
the
Facebook, we told you we own this game. And by the way, we have it on record, and I should have used that to start the podcast. Did I call overtime before this tournament started?
you
I
did. I
called
called this. I
overtime.
called the score right in
You
the
called the
final
score
game.
right. I called 4-3 in overtime. You called 3-2. You
Yep.
called regulation. You did during the game when we texted during the game. You did call McDavid on the winner. I always thought McKinnon would get another goal in the game, but oh my God, how fun was that game? This tournament lived up to the hype. This game lived up to the hype. So good for the NHL. So wonderful to watch.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was at a bar here in LA watching the game.
As I was in Florida
A,
watching.
a bar I went to with a couple of American friends um, who are not MAGA guys, so they were actually kind of rooting for Canada in the game,
That's funny.
based on everything that's happened between the countries lately. But the interesting thing was, I walked up to the bar from my parking spot, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm walking into the Lions Den. The outside
Yeah.
of this joint is festooned with American flags." Uh,
Well, it's good to
and
hear.
I'm not usually quiet in my fandom.
Yeah.
So when the Canadians scored each of their three goals, I was pretty loud.
Yeah.
But had a great time. Had a great
Oh,
time.
so much
It
fun. But
was
sorry, go ahead. Sorry, letting you
it
finish.
was just an outstanding final. The game was like it was like it was like an Olympic game. It felt like an Olympic gold
Well,
medal game. It
I
was
you
amazing.
I saw an interview today with American coach Sullivan, and I think he actually said some really good things. The quality of play, the speed of the game,
Yeah.
of the tournament, the execution by the players, the buy-in by the players was by far none way more than I think anybody ever expected for what was supposed to be an all-star break. This, like, everybody's got to remember, this was supposed to be an all-star replacement, and it was supposed to
Yeah.
be fun and whatnot. But how serious, given
It was
all the
blood sport.
political images, it just turned into the World Cup of hockey. It just, and obviously it was only four nations versus all eight of the normal teams that play in it. But what this did for the game of hockey is just so good. I had people texting me that don't normally watch and saying how great this was and how much fun it was, and comparing their football fans or their baseball fans, and they went, "Oh my God, how fun is this to watch?" And it was just, you know, great. But let's talk about the ratings. Like the final game, and again, depends. We've both said the number that's being reported out there is somewhere around the 16 million mark for North America.
Well, it was
Um,
the reported number for the US was 9.3 with a
well,
peak of 10.4.
right, and in Canada, Sportsnet put out something that said their AMA, which is the average minute audience for any
Yeah.
viewer out there that doesn't understand that, they said it was 5.7, yet what's being reported was closer to 6 and 7, which was the peak. So
Yeah.
the people putting out the numbers are sort of conflating average AMA audiences with peak and Mexicans, but it doesn't matter. This
Screw it. I'm
was the
going with 17
largest,
million.
absolutely, this was the largest audience for a non-Stanley Cup hockey game. The only one that breaks it is actually the final from this past year of the Oilers versus Florida, which
Mhm.
was in the 15 million, 14 to 15 million range. But what this did for the game of hockey and in North America, it was just phenomenal.
Yeah. There's a few things I want to circle back on the tournament generally, but um, there you have to try to look at the downsides as well because
Yes.
not everything is all
No.
roses and champagne. Injuries.
Yes.
Shea Theodore. out for the season with a broken ankle. I'm not sure,
Yeah,
or
they're
broken rib.
saying,
Sorry,
so
broken
yeah, they're
wrist.
saying he could be back before the playoffs. Now, I think you're right. I think there's injuries that were like his that he could probably miss the rest of the regular season, back before the playoffs, but they're going to make the playoffs.
Yeah,
Then there's
McAvoy.
McAvoy, who likely is going to miss the rest of the regular season. And the way the Bruins are playing,
They're not going to make the
they're
playoffs,
not
but
going to
we
make the
but we said
playoffs.
they were going to make the playoffs two
Right.
months ago. So,
Now, there's conflicting reports out of Florida. They're actually
but
saying that Matthew
Matthew
Tkachuk
Kachuk,
could miss the rest of the season. That will be devastating for the Panthers.
yeah,
And then there's Brady Tkachuk, who knows, but they're saying day to day, week to week, or whatnot. He hasn't played since returning, although there's only been a
yeah.
couple games.
So
Um,
the
yes, there's good and
the
bad. There's
downside
insurance.
to having an ultra competitive All Star break is that
Yes,
some people are going to get hurt.
yes,
But all in all, I'd say worth it,
right.
especially because nobody on the Canadians was hurt.
Well,
Because
Theodore.
well, no, the Montreal
Oh,
Canadiens
the
were hurt.
Montreal Canadiens. Oh, yes, 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 yes. But the other side of this thing too is that this was a great preview for the Olympics next year for everybody to reminder that the NHL players are returning to the Olympics next year. The
Yep.
NHL, IIHF, and the Olympic Committee have solved all their issues. One of them was insurance, and revenue splits was the big one. But insurance was a big one as well. So because
Okay,
the
so
players.
two topics I want to cover
And
off
sorry, like let's
fast.
finish that. Let's yeah, finish
There's
that. And
two.
then the NHL has committed to doing the World Cup of Hockey in 2 year increments after that. So 26, 28,
Oh yeah,
30 Olympics,
every other
32.
year.
It's just going to be so much fun to watch best on best again. We had way too long of a break, 9 years of not having it. This proved that there is a hunger for it.
Yeah. But come up to the Olympics for next
Yes.
year. Coming up to the Olympics, the two topics I wanted to touch on fairly briefly, I guess, get your thoughts on because I have my own. Number one, of the young players in the league now who did not make the teams, who do you expect to see on the ice in the Olympics next year?
Well, I think that's a great point. And just to remind people listening, is that the Four Nations Cup was a shortened roster. There was only three additional players, one extra goalie, and you had your choice of defensemen, forwards, but there was only two extra skaters on each team, not including goalies, versus the Olympics where there'll be five or six extra players that will be named to the team. So the rosters will be expanded for Olympics or
Yep.
World Cup of Hockey, which is a big difference because this was a short tournament. They didn't want to have guys sitting around not doing anything. But you're right. So of the players that you say, like there's guys like Connor Bedard, Quentin Byfield, Macklin Celebrini, Sebastian Cosa from the Detroit, Fantilli, and Seth Jarvis will be on this team. You can go on and on. But how many of those guys will be on the team? I'm going to say there's going to be two or three of them on the team because this will be a set. The Olympic, as much as this was a setup for the Olympics will be set up for the next World Cup of Hockey because
Yeah.
there'll be five, six, seven players on most of those rosters that won't see it because of age and aging out.
Yeah.
Crosby won't get past he'll probably play next year, but he won't play in the World Cup of Hockey 2 years later.
Yeah.
So I think that for sure Quentin Byfield will be on this team come the Olympics, and one or if not both of Bedard and Celebrini. And
Okay.
Fantilli, I think, could be on this team. Like it could be four of them on this team come the Olympics. So, and then on the
These
U.S.
are
side,
all forwards, though. The
those are all.
scary thing is there
I
aren't any young, up and coming Canadian defensemen that scare you.
Yep.
And even worse, there's no young, up and coming goal
Well, La Cosa from
who has proven zilch.
yes, right, and
I mean,
so
we don't even know
and
if he's going to be a starter in the NHL.
right, and George, I forget his first name, George, that was the World Junior goalie from this year. They're expecting him to be maybe not in the Olympics, but the World Cup of Hockey too in 2028. He'll be in the mix there. Yes, but you're right. Goaltending. Well, let's go back then. Goaltending was our issue coming in, but we were way out of line of not mentioning this. How good was Bennington in that final?
It's unbelievable. And so he's your leader out of the clubhouse to start next year in Italy. I mean, it's
How he wasn't. I know McDavid scored. Let's again. We've gone too far into the future. We let's finish off this year's. How was he not named the player of the game? for those two robs on Matthews in overtime alone, he should have been the player of the game. No
Yeah.
disrespect to McDavid or McKinnon, who was the player of the tournament. I'm not sure that was the right pick on either case. And
Yeah.
not that
Bennington
Binnington should
saved
get
their
the
bacon.
save their bacon in the overtime. And then how does the best player on the planet get left wide open in the slot in overtime? And unfortunately, for me, as a Canadian Leafs fan, it was Matthews' assignment. And when you watch the video, he skates to the corner towards Marner as the defenseman is going after him as well, and leaves him wide open.
Well,
So
don't forget I mean, yes, the Americans had more jump in the overtime, but at the same time, the American forwards were playing shorthanded.
yes.
And they had to just be mentally tired, if not physically tired at that point.
Oh,
I was
absolutely.
starting to say the longer this overtime goes, the better it'll be
Oh
for
yeah.
Canada because they had fresher legs.
It benefited Canada, no doubt, no doubt. Which was great. And there was another point I wanted to make that I forgot. But the other thing for this tournament, which was just strikes home again, how how important is good defense and good goaltending. We had the most talented offensive players in the world on the ice. And outside of the two blowouts of Finland because of their deficiency on defense, no disrespect, they just don't. This was an NHL tournament, so they couldn't bring in guys from
Yep.
Europe. They had three major injuries. So, but Canada 3-2 US, three
3-1 in the
4-3,
first
3
game.
3-1 in the first game, 4-3. Like these were close fought games with great defense that just held the best scores in the world to very limited goals outside
Yep.
of those two blowouts. Defense and the Canadian defense stood on their head. The American defense stood on their head. Like McAvoy not being in this game was another benefit to Canada. Their best defenseman
Yep.
not being there, but I was out
All
of
right.
breath after the
Let's
game.
talk about who on the American team might change.
Yeah, and that's the other one
Because
is that
I mean, you have two
You got
Canadians,
Cole
you
Caulfield.
Cole Caulfield and Lane Hudson. Although
Yeah,
I can't see the Americans taking Quinn Hughes and Cole and Lane Hudson.
maybe
Those are two very
Logan Cooley.
non-physical defensemen.
Logan Cooley
Logan Cooley, yes, for
as another a
sure.
forward. Brock Faber was already on the team.
Yeah,
Not in the league yet. James Hagens will be there.
he won't be there next year.
Yeah,
The Americans are way too deep for a 19-year-old to make the
yeah.
Olympic
There's
team.
there's there's probably not as many up and coming Americans as there is with Canada in the forward,
Canada.
but
But again,
Will Smith.
their
There's
up
a
and
few of
comers are
them.
not defensemen other than Lane.
Dustin Wolf, another great goaltender, potentially could
Yeah.
be added to their list. So much fun, and this is going to be so good next year to watch the Olympics.
Yep.
But
So
expanded
I
rosters.
have one more question on the Olympics
Yeah,
for you, and
yeah,
I have a theory on this as well. So this was a fly by the seat of your pants tournament because the teams had like two total practices together
yeah.
before they hit the ice, and the hockey was insanely entertaining. The pace was incredible. Do you think the game will be less or more entertaining given that these teams will have more time to practice during the summer in advance of the Olympic break and have more time to gel as a team and create structured systems, especially defensive systems?
Right.
Do you think I worry that might bog the game down a little bit,
You
and
know,
a lot of
I
the entertaining aspect of it
I think it's going
was
to be good because like just so for other people that are listening don't understand is that they'll have Olympic camps in the summer previously to next season. So this summer, Team Canada, Team USA, all the teams will have some sort of let's call it a development camp. It's not a development camp, but like the World Juniors do. They will
mm-hmm,
get their roster of guys, and it'll be more than the 20 some odd guys they're allowed. There'll probably be 30, 35 guys that are invited that they will
yep,
then pick the team from that will play and practice together. I think it's going to help. Like this quality of play was just fantastic. I think it can only get better
okay,
when you add more guys because you think of here's the other question is it for Team Canada this year they won so you can't say they didn't pick the right team or whatnot. Who do you think should have been on the team that wasn't? I have my thoughts. Do you have any? guys. I have at least
Mm,
one forward and at least one defenseman. I've said it
well,
before.
Aaron Ekblad, you've been singing the Aaron Ekblad tune
Yeah. Yes.
since the beginning.
Yes. I would say the forward. I still would have. I don't think the Jets got enough credit. I think Mark Scheifele should have been on this team as a forward in terms of scoring talent. For the Americans, should have John Carlson been on this team as a defenseman to give him
I was curious about that one myself.
a little more experience on the point because they had a fairly young blue line.
Yeah.
Um, so did John Carlson does he make the team now when it gets expanded to for the Olympics? Possibly. You saying Caulfield should have been on this team going into this.
I'm
it's
also
difficult to
curious. I
say.
mean, once we're talking about uh, Montreal Canadiens, and that, like, should they have considered Nick Suzuki as a two-way centerman
Maybe.
who can put up 80 points a year? And
But here's one of the points to all this, and you name two very good potential guys that probably will be on the expanded roster.
well,
But
by the way, one other guy before you comment
yeah,
that we hadn't talked about,
yeah.
and he's a bit of a dark horse. And the reason why it came up is because we were talking in my brain is because we were talking about uh, topics for this podcast, and how the Capitals have been on fire since the return from break, and he didn't have anybody at the tournament. What about Tom Wilson?
Tom Wilson does again, yeah, we talked about this before, and did he deserve to be on the Team Canada roster? We just didn't think with the agitators of Bennett, Marchand.
I would have
Um,
traded. I would have dumped Marchand for
yeah,
Tom Wilson
I,
any
I
day of the week.
that's going to be an interesting piece. Does Marchand make this team in the Olympics as poorly of a tournament as he had?
No,
I don't think he makes that team. I don't
nope.
think he
And by
gets
the way,
invited. He
you
doesn't
could make
play.
the argument that Mitch Marner might not have either, except for the last two games.
Well, except for he made the first game and the last game.
Yeah.
He made a great play in the first game and he made two great plays in the final. He made that pass to Bennett, which was fantastic, and then he obviously made the
Well, I
penalty.
thought he was much more visible against Finland as well. Maybe because of
Yeah,
Finland,
well,
the
I don't
Finnish defensive.
I discount that game to some degree. But where I was going to go before on the American side was when you were saying Caulfield and Suzuki be on this team. When you look at who didn't play in the final, their sit on offense was one of the most talented offensive players who was invisible the whole time was
Kyle
Connor.
Connor.
Like he sat for the final. That was incredible to me that he sat for the final. But it showed you how
How
important
deep they are.
defense and deep they are, and how
Yeah.
important defensive play is. And he's not a defensive player by any stretch of the imagination, but a talented scorer like that was left off the thing. So maybe to your point, the Olympics is more defensive, but I don't know how much more defensive you get than this. Like Slavin was a beast, McAvoy was a beast. The Canadian
Yeah.
defensive team played well. Like let's wrap this up. This was just by far and away the most fun week and a
It was
half
a
of
home
hockey.
run. It was a
Home
home
run
run
in
complete.
all nations. So
Okay. So we're back.
we're
NHL
back
is
to the
back.
NHL. You want to know
Right.
my favorite part of the last week and a half? Now going in and looking forward to the NHL second. Well, we call it the second half of
You
the
had
season, although the
67
50
more
is.
opportunities to bag on Nick Robertson in the last 2 days.
It was a week and a half. I didn't have to bag on Nick Robertson. Of course, what does he do tonight? He scores two goals. Now, beautiful setups by Ty Domi. Sorry, Ron. By Ty Domi, by Max Domi. Um, put both of
Otherwise
them
known
on
as
a
Ty's son.
yeah, that's Ty's son, Nick. Ron calls him Nick's son. How's Nick's son doing? Sorry, Ty's son
Ty's
doing.
son.
But both of them were put on a pedestal. So look at the Leafs have come out. They blew the doors off of Carolina for the first period, then fell asleep and had to get a couple empty netters to finish it off. And then tonight they came into the game asleep and finished strongly.
Well, maybe they can get Robertson and Domi playing well to use them as trade bait for Mikko Rantanen.
Well, I think what happened to at 14 million, we're not getting Rantanen, although the Leafs are on the list, unless
You
Marner's
trade
part of
Marner.
that deal. But that's the other thing. We're running towards the playoffs now, in the playoffs. We're also running to 2 weeks from now is the trade deadline,
Yep.
and I have said this from the day one. What the Leafs need to do is some depth scoring. Now, these two games since they've played this weekend they got some depth scoring. Now, is that showcasing guys for trades? Who knows? I don't know, but they need some more production out of the the back end six, or we're not going anywhere in the playoffs. Hopefully that's what we need. What do you think of Montreal so far? Obviously, coming out of the break now, there's been a small thing, but how you feeling?
I would be shocked if they were in acquiring mode. I think they're
They're
I think
exactly where you thought they'd be at 500.
they're exactly where I thought they'd be at 500, and I think they've got a couple of expiring contracts that they've got to think long and hard about. One of them is um, Jake Evans, and I think
What-
they are going to try to keep him. I think that
Do you,
if they
do
can't,
you think that do you think they'll trade him to Toronto? You said they were a perfect mix for Toronto. He's been in the rumor mill about Toronto being interested. Do you think the Canadiens will make a move to send him to
yeah,
their
look,
rival?
they traded Thomas Plekanec to the Maple
Yeah.
Leafs at the deadline a bunch of years
You didn't
ago.
trade Plekanec to Toronto. You gave him away for a bag of pucks.
Well, they
And the
got a second
stupidity
round pick out of him
the
or whatever.
stupidity of the Toronto dumbass took him.
Well, I think that they
Took him.
took him. I don't think they took him for true depth scoring. I think they took him because they needed somebody who could play good defensive center play and somebody who could win faceoffs at
And
crunch
he did
time, and that's
absolutely
what he got.
nothing.
Um, that trade aside, I think it is possible that they could try. I don't know what the Canadians would want. Honestly, they
Yeah.
don't. The Maple Leafs don't have a lot of draft picks to offer up.
No.
They've got a bunch of prospects who I don't think that they would trade for Jake
Well,
Evans.
the one person, unfortunately, is Minton has been mentioned as a potential usage. Like Cowan is the future in terms of potential scoring, and
Yeah.
Fraser Minton is potentially going to be used in a trade. And let's hope that Nick Robertson gets shipped off with whoever is going in the other direction as well.
And then David Savard, I think, is as good as
Right,
gone.
right,
That's part of the reason why they got Alex Carrier,
right,
is so that they could get, one veteran and make Savard a little bit more expendable. I don't think they'll get much more than a third round pick for him, but
right,
maybe you get a second round pick in 26 or 27
right,
because the Canadians have a billion draft picks in the next 2 years. So why don't trade for future assets? Because as they get better and better, you're going to want to have more draft picks
right,
to trade for assets, to draft more guys for your future. Like
right.
they
So,
don't need any more like right now.
so you're thinking at this point, Montreal is a trader, as a
They're a seller.
seller and not a buyer.
They're
They're not going to
they
make that
are a
push.
seller in they are a seller unless for whatever reason, and it's so unlikely that there is a bona fide hockey trade to be made that
Right,
sets them up more for the long
right,
term.
right.
But I don't see that happening. I
So
don't see.
here's the other question. Then are you finished with Montreal? Because the other question is, are you surprised that Mikko Rantanen's name is being mentioned in trade as the trade deadline piece again? Because apparently Carolina has tried to sign him, and they apparently offered him the 14 million he wants, and he has said, "I'm not ready to sign that contract yet."
Yeah, well,
But
he hasn't been.
2 weeks to decide if he's going to sign, because if not, he's likely going to get traded.
Well, I don't. Has he even played a home game in Carolina yet,
I
or
think he
like
has,
or
and
more than one? Like
I don't
he
remember.
barely knows Raleigh.
Right,
How do you make a decision on a long term deal based on
right.
just a few games? For
But
the
if you're
more
Carolina, do you take that risk and have him walk at the end of the season if you don't win the Stanley Cup that you just traded away a talented player in return and you got nothing?
no,
Because
they'll have to trade him if he won't sign. They have to trade him.
exactly, that's you got 2 weeks for him to
Yeah,
make up his mind. Because
right.
if they don't,
I'm
he's
just
got to
looking at it from
go.
his perspective. I'm looking at it from his perspective. Like,
No, I just don't
be
disagree with
honest.
you.
Like, I don't know if I'm ready to sign yet.
Right.
I haven't even found an apartment.
And by the way, you asked me a couple weeks ago, a trade, would you make this trade? And Marner was part of it. You tell me Rantanen's coming and he'll sign, I would give you Marner.
Well, okay. Here's a finer version of that. Would you trade them one for one?
I would make Carolina take Nick Robertson as well. That's your
Right.
bag of pucks.
That's the bag of pucks.
Well, because let's be
Well, you
honest,
got to make the money
Ratnan's a
work,
little
right?
older. Ratnan's a little older. He's won a Stanley Cup, so he's proven. So you might have to pay a little bit extra for him, and he scores way more goals than Marner does. Now Marner gets more total points
Yeah.
because the assist
So
side.
so yeah,
Yes, I would
Carolina
make
doesn't
that.
take it one for one.
I would make that trade.
Yeah, I probably would too.
I would make
Also,
that trade. You're getting a little
Rantan's
more.
bigger.
You're also you're getting a little more grit. You're getting a little
Yeah,
more feistiness. Like again, we said this in the Canada US game on last Saturday night. Marner disappeared when the going got tough. He
yeah,
disappeared and he kept funneling the puck off. He got booted from the first line to the third line because he wouldn't hold on to the puck because he doesn't want to get hit. He
yeah.
doesn't want to get hit in those games, and I love him. The guy skates like the wind and does everything and passes like nobody, very few people can. But when it comes down to physical play, which it is in the playoffs, we've said this before, defense wins games. He seems to go missing. He hasn't proven he can do it in the playoffs. And if he can't, we need to get rid of him.
Okay, so you do that deal in a heartbeat.
Do it in a heartbeat.
Who, other than Toronto,
Yeah.
who are the biggest buyers? I think Edmonton has to be at the top of the list, right?
Well,
They
I
need a
think
goalie and
Edmonton's
they need a
got to.
defenseman.
And look what happened in these last two games. Now, guys are tired, obviously, and whatnot. Obviously, McDavid's tired and whatnot, but they got blown out against Philadelphia and they got smoked today against Washington. Like they need, I will
Does the
still say
John
they need,
Gibson trade happen this week or next week? I
it's
guess
got
is
to
the best
happen.
way.
It's got to happen between now and next Friday. If it doesn't, I'm going to reverse on what I've said. If the Oilers don't make a move that gives them another defenseman and some goaltender to come in and, when they need them, the Oilers are not winning the Stanley Cup.
Yeah. So
And
who
they
can
might
they
not
get
make
on
the
D?
Stanley Cup.
Who can they get on D?
I don't know. Do they go for Seth Jones? Does Seth Jones wants
How do you make
to
the
out
money
of
work?
Chicago? Well, I think Chicago's going to have to take some of that 9 million. I think his average AAV is about 9.5 million because of and he's got 8 years left, so you got term, which is
Yeah.
great. But if they take half of it, Chicago's got plenty of cap room. They could take half, eat half of it. They want rid of him, the 8 years of that. I think if you can get him for five, I think you take that. I think they
Okay.
need it. He's a physical, talented. Now he's not playing the way he has, and you got to be worried about another 4 or 5 years left on that contract at that value. But if someone's willing to eat half of it at five, I'm taking him. I take him
I
in a
would
heartbeat.
take honestly, I'd take
You give him six, you might take it.
I would take David Savard for
Yeah,
a third
true.
round pick
Absolutely.
instead.
Absolutely. No, no question. I would agree with you 100% on that, but I think they need a defenseman and they need another goaltender.
Yeah.
If they're going into the playoffs the way they sit right now, sorry to say, I love them. I love to see them win the Stanley Cup. It just ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
And it's just so I think they're the biggest buyer.
I think Colorado is a buyer.
I think Colorado continues to be a buyer.
Right? They've got follow on moves that they had,
Yeah,
they freed up some money in getting
yeah,
Nechas and
yeah.
they've got room to make moves.
I
And
don't
so
think
does Dallas.
Carolina.
Dallas always
Yeah,
makes
I think
moves.
Carolina's not done either. And even if Rantanen signs, I don't think they're done.
Yeah.
They got to do something too. And and if Kachuk is injured, Florida's got to be a buyer.
Well, they'll have space. They'll
They'll have
have cap
space. They're
space
going to
for
have
it.
to do something to add some more scoring talent.
Yeah.
And the Leafs obviously are buyers. We've said that before. The interesting thing is, does Washington need to do anything? Like, I don't think they need to do a
No,
squad. They
I think
might add a
Washington's
bit
on a
piece.
plan. I
Yeah,
think
they might be a
Washington's
bit
on a
screwed.
plan.
And how good are they playing? And let's talk about it.
Yep.
OV scores a hat trick today, another empty net goal. I forget what the
Yeah,
count
but
is
the
on empty
first
net
two
goals.
weren't.
The first two are great, but another hat trick today. He's now up to 32. He is tied. He's in the top 4 or 5 in hat tricks in a career. I
Is he
think
the
this.
oldest guy to score a hat trick? I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. I don't know. But how he's 13 away from breaking the record, 12 from tying. I now think he does it this year, no
I
question.
think he'll do it this year too. I
The
think he'll
question
do
is,
it
does
this.
he do it before game 82 or does he score an empty netter on game 82? Does he?
Who cares? Who cares
Who
how he does
cares?
it?
I
Just
agree with
the
you
fact that he's going to
100%.
do it this year when
Oh, it's good. So
it didn't
good.
look like he was going to, and the injury derailed half his
Right.
unreal, unreal.
Unreal. Unreal. Okay. So, because we're getting close probably our time. How are we doing on time?
We have enough time to wrap stuff up.
Okay, so let's talk about the second half. What are you looking? What's your biggest surprise between now and the playoffs? Do you have any other playoff mind thoughts? Like, and what do you think? What in terms of playoffs? Who's in, who's out compared to who's now? And what's your biggest change from what's going on now between
I
now and the
think
playoffs?
I think the playoff picture in the East is going to be completely unpredictable until the last day of the season. It's gonna be a complete mess, and I think it's going to change multiple times in terms of the direction of travel. I think you're going to see all of these teams almost. So the 4 or 5 teams that are in the mix for the last spot are all going to go on these mini 3, 4, 5 game winning streaks, and the standings are just going to be in flux the whole time. And these guys are going to win 4, lose 3, and it's going to be wild. It's
So
absolutely wild.
Rangers are out right now. We didn't talk
Yep.
about them about they're going to be a big buyer potentially at the trade deadline. They might be both. They might be a buyer and a seller at the trade
Yep.
deadline. They're 2 points out. Do they make the playoffs?
No,
I agree 100%. 100% they don't make the playoffs. I
I
don't think the
don't think they
Bruins
do.
make the playoffs. I think the last two spots are really between Detroit, Ottawa, and I'm gonna say Columbus. Like I don't see the Islanders coming up. I don't see the Rangers. I don't think the Bruins if McAvoy's
Nope.
out. I think we're close on the East in terms of playoff positioning right
Nope.
now,
But
although
I think
Columbus
they're
is right
gonna.
now. Columbus
I
is gonna be a buyer too. I think
I
Columbus is gonna make a push.
Columbus is going to be a buyer. They could take Seth Jones back. How cool
He's
would that
actually
be?
said he's interested. He would go back to
Did
Columbus.
he? Oh, that'd
Yeah.
be cool. That would be
So
very cool.
I, absolutely. So, but yeah, I think you're right. I think in the East, is this Washington's to throw away? Like, does Washington get caught if they end up winning the President's Trophy? Do they get caught in the President's Trophy jinx and blow up in the playoffs? That's going to be a big question. Now, the West. West is really interesting again, too. There's 4 or 5 teams vying for two. I think Colorado Avalanche are going to make the playoffs. So I think there's again one spot up for grabs between Vancouver, Calgary. I think St. Louis is going to be buyers. I said they were going to make the playoffs at the big. They were going to take that last spot. I think they're kind of done. So it's really between Calgary and Vancouver who's going to make that. To me, it's between those two. Does Calgary become buyers or sellers? I think they're going to sell. Like
They're going
even
to
Vancouver.
sell. They're going to sell.
I don't know if
But
Vancouver stick like there is Pedersen. We talked about it last thing. Pedersen didn't had a really bad Four
yep.
Nations. His trade value is, and he showed no gumption at all. Like who's going to want that contract? Who's going to
No.
want him? Buffalo is saying they'd take him again, but why would you?
Yeah. His
Um,
his
like I like
his
that
his,
last
his stock
playoffs.
is pretty low right now. His
I'm going to
stock is
reverse
pretty
what I
low.
said. I think St. Louis could still make the playoffs. Thinking of Vancouver and Calgary, I just
All
can't.
right. So okay, with that, I am going to stick to my preseason, if not prediction, but I'm going to be consistent with it.
Yes,
I think Utah is going to be a buyer at the deadline, and they're going to make a run.
they're 57 points. They're not far. They're 6 points out, but yeah, they could be.
I think
I
they're going to
still
make
think
a run.
I'm going to say Calgary sneaks in, Vancouver is out.
Calgary sneaks in, and then it dooms them for the next 5 years of mediocrity. All right.
How much
I think
fun.
we're out of time for this
Yep.
week, but wow, we're back in it. We're back in it. This game is riding high, man.
This is so good. It was so much fun. The last week and a half. Now we're going to have such a great run between now and next Friday's, week Fridays trade deadline. See what the movers and shakers will look like, how this is going to spin out, and then we make the run to the final 10, 15 games to the Stanley Cup final. How fun is it going to be to watch it all unfold?
It's going to be a hell of a spring, man.
And it's been great. I can't believe we're at this point of the season already, but hey, oh Canada, how good is that? We'll see
A
you
good way
next
to
week.
end on that.
We'll
We'll end
see
on
you
that.
next
Oh, Canada.
weekend. And oh Canada, we'll see you next weekend. Good to
All
see
right,
you.
buddy.
Okay, bye-bye.